11:01. So thanks for coming this morning. I'm Brian Wright. I'm the principal of Town Planning Urban Design Collaborative, and leading the team of consultants who are set up there in the back of the room to help you all update your zoning ordinance. They're actually working back there, so they may be making noise. So they're not being rude. That's part of the process because we want them close enough so they can actually hear what we're talking about, so they can respond real time. It's pretty neat. Grab them in and they go give them a secondhand report of what we talked about. But keep it down back there. So if we could quickly go do some introductions. This is the meeting to talk about transportation and connectivity. Tell me who you are, if you are part of a group or organization.
I'm Larry Gardner. I'm just a citizen here interested in it. I was on the planning commission for a number of years and had an active role in it for a good while. Still interested in it, but I retired and just keep riding around, so I'm checking on it.
Hi, I'm Dick Waters. I'm a Williamson County Commissioner and a Williamson County Planning Commissioner, former mayor of Nolensville, but mainly I'm a citizen of Nolensville. Good to be here.
Name's Bill Rooks. I live in Scales Farmstead. I'm part of the people that come in and ruin part of what was the old beautiful small town. And I'm concerned that we can kind of keep that personality flavor. What Nolensville is.
Suzanne Rennicutt. I'm on the Senate Events Advisory Committee. We've been on the Star Spangled Celebration and Veterans Day Parade, which is and, I've been here about 15 years, I think. I'm not sure.
I'm looking forward to observing what happens when you shut the road down.
It's a well-oiled machine by now.
Yeah.
This is probably our 15th year. Right. Okay, okay. Because we started that with her.
Hello, Taylor. I've lived here for about 14 years, but not on any committees.
So we can talk here.
Karen and Randy Tucker have been here almost 34 years. Interesting what's going on.
In the back there, under the maps.
Oh, hey, Ross Muirhead. I'm on the Trees and Trails Committee for the last 4 years, Planning Commission now. Me and my family moved here the last 3 years. I do enjoy biking in town, actually. So.
David Windrow, fire chief and a resident. I live in Big Creek. Resident for up to employees. So we have two hats.
I introduced
Oh,
Karen, my wife.
Karen, there we go. Karen. Fill in the lane, Sobel. 14 years, that was like the time when I left.
Mike Dowling, my wife's commissioner. I am not associated with any of the different town committees or anything like that. So I'm just a resident. Lived here about 12 years. Also an avid cyclist and in general enjoy taking my kids and using trails and street sidewalks, all that kind of stuff. So.
A good biking center.
Yeah. That's why.
Sherry Stevenson and Tony Stevenson. We live in Telfair. We've been here 2 years. Prior to that, we lived in Franklin for about 14 years. So we've been in the area for a good while. So just residents, just interested in what's going to happen here.
I'm Jason Hale. I serve as a local pastor here in the community. Also, I'm on the Town Events Advisory Committee. Suzanne mentioned, I've been in Nolensville for over 6 years, and my wife and I have 2 children in the school systems here. And love Nolensville, and we live in Stonebrook, which was kind of the original Nolensville church, Rolling Hills Community Church.
And you in the back, sir, come on up.
Jared Schaefer, I'm with Town Planning and Design Collaborative.
Project manager.
Hi, I'm Gretchen Anderson. I've been here since 1990. You guys can do the math. And I kind of fit in all the categories. I'm on the Historical Society. I am the Secretary Treasurer of the Milwaukee Watershed Association, and I'm a veteran, Air Force veteran. So love Nolensville. where we came from. I'm Kristen Denver. I'm a resident.
Do you introduce?
Sure, yeah.
I'm Mimi Stricker. We're with Christ Presbyterian Academy in Nashville, and we have a group of students just observing all of this. We're part of the Institute for Cultural Engagement that are just really interested in how this collaboration takes place. And so we have students from media to science to art, just looking at what it looks like to be part of a community. And so we are observing, but we're very thankful to be here.
So my kids are still there. Well, we need to have good behavior. All right.
Before you start, I want to have one thing. I've been here since '78.
Oh, you have.
I started my career working in Stonebrook, a very great business.
Great.
So I've seen all of y'all come in.
Thank you for letting them all come.
Can't hardly shut the door once it starts.
Isn't that weird? You got fans. All right, so the format of this meeting is pretty freeform. Really, we obviously heard a good bit last night and other discussions we've had with the community about traffic problems. This meeting is to talk about that, so I'm sure, but also to talk about transportation, and not just with cars, but with people on foot or on bike or whatever it means. Can't put any boats or kayaks in your creek, can you?
Sometimes. Yeah, I think they're gonna get out.
Okay.
We had a kayaker go the whole way. It was pretty treacherous.
It actually meets the definition of a river.
Okay. See, that's why we have these meetings. I'm not from around here, right? I said that last night. But the pictures I saw, it was a low time, and I saw that bedrock or whatever that was there.
Well, I've seen it dry.
Yeah.
Long dry.
Not too long.
Several times.
So talking about just transportation, and then also the idea of connectivity, because you may know that there's a major thoroughfares plan that's happening simultaneous to our zoning update. And there also is, not necessarily specifically related to this meeting right now, but just in case you don't come to the other meeting, so you're aware, there's also a EPA, you guys got a grant, and so there's a study being done on the creek and the flooding and things like that. And so we've been coordinating with the consultants for the transportation plan and for the EPA study, so that all of our work is very holistic and intertwined. And so that will hopefully give you all a better outcome, rather than having three consultants say conflicting things and have studies that don't support each other. So the thing that I'm trying to understand is, we talked last night about the idea of how important connectivity is to traffic problems. And, we work all over the country with all kinds of communities. Some of them are, you think you're in a room with a bunch of planners, but people are just into it or whatever. Other places we go, it's the first time they even heard of zoning or, whatever. And so I don't take anything for granted. So what I wanted to share with you, how many people weren't here last night? Okay, good. So it'll be refresher for me, but we talked about last night the relationship of the way that neighborhoods and subdivisions are developed into traffic. And, sort of after World War II, we changed how we developed cities and towns and neighborhoods, right? Before World War II, it was all about people moving around. The towns and cities were designed before there even were cars. But after World War II, it's like, we can all start getting cars now. We can all drive everywhere. Let's focus on that. And so our whole environment, our whole world was changed and designed to kind of deal with that new passion and obsession with cars. Now, there were many unintended consequences that came along with that. One of those things was traffic, and not just because more people had cars, but because the way that development occurred, people started flipping off streets. They started, focusing on a new development was a subdivision. It wasn't a natural growth evolution of town. Because if you look at the historic core of the city or town, you have the square, the courthouse square, the village green or whatever. And then you have like commercial space around that, and then you have residential and kind of work this way, and they made blocks, and some of them are perfectly rectangular and straight lines, and others up in New England, kind of gnarly, kind of medieval looking and whatever. But at the end of the day, it just grew and it grew and it grew like that. Hey, Emily, can you grab this real quick? I think it's the basketball goal installers. Give me a basketball goal. That's my wife, by the way. She keeps us all show running. So it would just grow, right? But once we had the car, it didn't have to be near the center of things. And so we said, oh, it's no big deal. I can drive anywhere I want to. And land was cheap at the edge, and the farm was available. And so they, boom, we'll put a new neighborhood there, a subdivision there. And then, hey, what if we started doing these cul-de-sacs? And what if we did this? And all of a sudden, none of the roads connected. And so now you have a neighborhood, and for all intents and purposes, every house in that neighborhood is just one giant cul-de-sac because they all come out in one spot. Most times on Nolensville Road or somewhere, some of these big roads where y'all are having traffic problems. Where before, you could go any street, oh, that's a little block. I'm going to turn here, I'm going to go around the, in the downtown, you can go a multitude of ways because the streets are connected. And so we disconnected our street network, and all of a sudden we caused traffic problems, and we added the cars that people started getting. And so you went from having no cars in the house to having maybe the richest people could have one car, and now it's like, it seems like everybody in the house has their own car in most places we work. And so it starts to pound upon itself. Now, I'm excited about being here now because most places we come to work, it's too late. They call us in after everything's goofed up, and they're like, hey, can you fix this? We've got all these strip highways and all this stuff. Town is just like every other town. We're here because our job's here, our family's from here, but we don't really love it. How do we make a place that we love? And so we can go in and fix all of these things, which is not easy to do. The land will be all built out. So there's all like, imagine you have a neighborhood full of roads that don't connect. We're like, hey, we know how to fix your traffic problem. We'll connect those roads. And you propose that to the neighborhood. It doesn't go over so well, right? And so here, you all have headed off in that pattern. And so most of your subdivisions are set up like that. But there's still a lot of land left that will be developed as this is supposed to be. And if we change the paradigm so that new development follows the rules of the way people have always made neighborhoods and towns, we'll be able to solve some of those problems. And so my goal is through this process and the major thoroughfare plan, that you'll quit talking about Nolensville Road because it won't be a problem. It'll just be one of many roads in town. But you're at this weird growing pain moment. So I've heard that it's a problem. Anybody want to say anything in addition to that, or did you all come here? Did y'all come here just to say, here, here?
Somebody told them, don't wait.
Yeah, right. And normally when we come to a small town like this to work, go, oh, the traffic's terrible here, whatever. I'm like, you guys live outside DC? Are you kidding? This is nothing. I got stuck at the light down there, and so for like 20 minutes, not today, luckily, but today is actually pretty good. So starting to doubt these stories I'm hearing. So what do we need to know about transportation?
I'm just gonna add something that you all may know or not know. 2005, the town incorporated long before I moved here, 1996. So in 2005, before I ever got involved, the planning commission came up with a land use policy. And what was interesting is those that followed and served really tried to look at that as, a little town that was incorporated on the trunk of a car. But the good thing that did happen is that all the neighborhoods had sidewalks. All land uses are reconnected. All the sidewalks that don't go anywhere will connect. So that template has been laid. And then when we got into looking at it deeper, with forming a Trees and Trails Committee, we had citizens review every new residential and commercial development to make sure it was connected by trails. Where we didn't have money, we went after grants hard. We got over $1.5 million to connect neighborhoods that didn't have sidewalks and so forth. But I just wanted to lay that history that I love that that's being built on. And the Trees and Trails Committee is continuing, and we're being innovative here. But I do want to give a shout out, not to me, to you, for me, spent time away from their family and built talent. Vision for land use connectivity. They also had a vision for public safety. All these new neighborhoods have sidewalks, and some have written where y'all live. The old neighborhood, we had to put in sidewalks and bike lanes with big route to school grants where everybody was cutting through, because those kids were in jeopardy. And we did it with 100% grants. It took 3 grants and the infrastructure's in. So now let's think about all this connectivity, but let's think of public safety, health, and welfare. That is the role of government. Where we're connecting roads into neighborhoods with children that have no sidewalks, we need to maybe expect more from developers and more from our government to create that safe infrastructure if you're going to put traffic from all over through, which I totally get what you're saying. But we have to think of the big picture.
No, that's a great point. There are some neighborhoods that are, so old, not here, but others that are so old where the roads were designed for, horses and stuff. And so they're tiny. And you can walk in the street safely and, but that was then, and so today, it's a great point. And it's good to know that you all have had this mindset of connectivity all along. So it's not, a lot of times when I come to a place, I'm like, hey, have you heard about this connectivity thing? And they're like, so the idea of just building off of what you're doing, but even taking it, one step further from the trails and greenways now into the vehicular realm as well. So for the streets and we did the zoning ordinance in Franklin 3.5 ago or so. And even before we showed up, you were required to make connections into the adjacent properties. So let's say you're a farms on both sides, farm 1 goes in, their roads have to stub in to the adjacent properties. So the next developer has to connect, so they're all connected. So you never have a situation where everybody's dumping onto one road. They can go through, the parallel roads. Well, what would happen is that they put the stub in, people would move in, and then it's 10 years later, and comes time to connect, and the next development comes in, and people lose their mind. And so somebody told the story last time in Brentwood, they put a sign at the end of each of those stub in roads, and it says, future road connection. Don't forget it. Don't say you didn't know it. And we're going to have that. But the idea is that it makes people aware of it. And in Franklin, even though the zoning ordinance says that you must connect, if 3 or 4 people come out wearing red shirts and say down with the connection, then the developers granted a variance and they don't have to connect. And they've shot themselves in the foot. And then the same people who had on the red shirt say in the next meeting, traffic sure stinks around here. And we say, yes, and you just made it worse because you flipped those streets off. And so what you see in this historic pattern of development and growth of a town is there's no such thing as a cut through. I said this last night. There's no cutting through neighborhoods. Every street goes through, and all streets are somewhat equal. And so the traffic isn't noticeable, even though it's connected, because it's distributed across a whole network of streets. Whereas now, if let's just say we connected one street through, all of a sudden everyone's like, the relief valve, and the pressure. And so now that street will have an impact. And so as you look at doing this connectivity, to your point, you have to be smart about it so you don't have more unintended consequences. And we don't hear about people speeding and things through neighborhoods, and so it's like, add a speed bump, right? And we'll slow them down or reduce the speed limit. Well, if you're in a situation where you're having to consider something like a speed bump, the speed bump is a sort of an aftermarket band-aid for a badly designed road, right? It means the road's too wide in the first place. If a road in a neighborhood is designed properly, you don't feel comfortable driving fast. And that's what you see in a lot of the historic parts of cities and towns. People don't drive fast, you don't need speed humps. And so one of the things that in some of the existing neighborhoods that are built a little bit maybe wider with a more suburban street standard that was required, by the way, they're engineering standards. If we're going to be connecting new neighborhoods, maybe some of those sort of impact fees and things that developers pay, sort of off-site improvements. It's obvious if you're going to connect into a big road, the developer will do like a turn lane or this or that. Well, maybe the other thing you do is sort of a smaller scale intervention is you retrofit the streets that you're connecting into to narrow them up and make them safer so that people don't feel comfortable speeding, because we don't want to take for granted that a development pattern was already put in place and we're going in a new direction and it's all going to just sync right up, right? We've got sort of Windows and Mac and we need to figure out how to line up those operating systems.
Like to say something. We're at that point. We laid out the subdivisions, and I was on the planning commission, Matt was on the profile before he became mayor. And we did this connectivity. Now, the people are here, when they go into a new subdivision and it comes time to connect to the next property, the cut through is what we get. What's a cut through? It's a cut through. Those streets have been dead ended. Beth was instrumental in putting a little pad to turn around at those for now, so they have a cul-de-sac there. Our street widths are 26 feet. That's our pavement width.
In a neighborhood?
In our neighborhood, it's
Wow.
26.
On street parking or no?
You have on street parking.
Is it used?
Yes. Heavily used. And then you hear that from the existing residents when it comes down to our streets are too narrow.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Too narrow for speeding.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, but we're at the point where we just need to get this connectivity. Beth's right. What was laid out early is the only thing we ever heard from planners. They talked to us about connectivity. So,
Yeah.
I think that one of the big challenges you guys have to understand, for people who maybe came before you, or maybe you came after, is that original planning documents, when you looked at them, a comp plan draft said that the old neighborhood would continue at its existing rate of development. It could be back in the lot. So the Ballinger Farms came, it's a great neighborhood, but it was very much denser, and it was funneling a lot more traffic into. People said, well, this was the policy plan, and then this changed. So I think that is the disconnect, where if you have a stepped out street, if you connect a higher, denser development, whether it's apartments or whatever, and then you do take it into a less dense neighborhood, I have found that people have more challenges with that than if it's comparable type of development. Like at Telfair, if you have something like Telfair connecting into you, maybe you wrap your brain around that a little bit differently than if you put a ton more higher density going through Telfair. But that's just an observation of human behavior. It's like expectation. It's like we want to connect, but what's connecting to us is a lot different than what we were told was going to connect. So that's good for discussion.
Yeah, that's a good point. And when you start to, this is the beginning for us, right? So we've done our homework, we've reviewed the existing zoning ordinance and looked at the comp plan and some of these things, but so I don't show up thinking I know it all. We really kind of wait to dig in until we start having these kind of conversations. So like making mental lists of here are the things I'm going to look into. So trying to get a better understanding of, when we're talking about connectivity, what is the Nolensville version of the current connectivity look like versus what I'm saying, and maybe it's the same and maybe it's not. One thing that I've noticed is when you connect neighborhoods, most neighborhoods, except for in very short places, tend not to be on a pretty regular grid. The roads are kind of incredibly swervy, and even if they connect to each other. And obviously depends very much so on the specific site that you're looking at. But most of the time, it's pretty inconvenient to drive through a neighborhood to get somewhere, as opposed to whatever more major street that your development is oriented towards. But again, depends if the development is of any size, and let's say there are multiple connection points. The people who live in this part of the development will use that road. People who live in this part will use that connection, that one. Or they'll all focus on this other connection that goes to the main road. And so you get that distribution, but I think that's the degree of connectivity is kind of where we need to go to. Because like in Franklin, Franklin has a lot of these more advanced planning things that they had already. So they changed it recently, but they initially had an intersection density requirement. So new developments, you had to show your intersection, your nodes and your connectors and the intersection density. And so the greater the intersection density, the more connectivity you have, and has positive benefits to the traffic situation. And so that may be something we need to look at. So if we say, yes, neighborhoods need to connect, it's going to show me whatever this big tract is up to the northeast, 700-acre farm. Yeah. And so they're going to connecting to the existing neighborhood that's there. And I said, well, how many connections? And it sounds like one right now. And so like, are there more roads that they can connect to? Can we get more connections instead of just one? And so those are the kind of things we're going to be looking into to try to better understand, what the implications are for sure. We saw a lot of people noting on the maps last night during the workshop, the idea of having a green corridor along the creek and other things. So they already have a good trail system in place. Does it currently traverse the entirety of the creek?
Yes, the original, it's not online, but I can put it online. We had somebody who volunteered as a master's project at University of Tennessee. We did an entire trail plan for the town, and we had a huge meeting with a lot of real property owners. This is a long time ago. So he came up with an entire trail plan that comes along the entire creek. And with that, it has to have rural property buy-in. And we were mentored by the Greenways and Trails coordinator by the state of Tennessee. He took Nolensville under their wing and trained us on timing of greenways and so forth. But there has always been a plan along Mill Creek. And the original Trees and Trails Committee wants to connect to Brentwood, all the way to Rutherford County, Nashville-Davidson County. Now, the new leadership may have other visions and desires, but it does feel like our Mill Creek is really a good asset. It seems like there's universal interest, but you have to respect those property rights of those rural people along the creek. That's where we have to get buy-in and partner and happen.
And so do you know if we have in our GIS existing trails layer? I believe there is. So it'd be good to see that and then compare. How can we get access?
I can get that to you.
Yeah, can you send it to Jared?
Sure.
JARED. And so we can compare that, because it seems like a no-brainer. I mean, I talked about last night, we always look for ways that we can find unique and special things about a place. And you have a couple right now. You have kind of like the historic rural hamlet kind of going on there. And then you have the creek. They happen to coincide, so that's good. And actually you can get people who are interested and people who are hamlet interested at the same place at the same time, and they can have synergies and all of that. But I think that seems like a good thing to sort out. Because in in Nashville, I mentioned last night, if you're developing along where the greenway goes, you have to add to the greenway. Like you have to be part of your property for greenway. And so over time, it will connect. So I think there's an opportunity to do something like that situation. Well, let's see. How about biking? Do you guys bike around here?
A lot of bikers.
Do you feel safe biking around here? Do you wear Lycra?
On the multimodal.
Do you have a pointy helmet? Okay, I'm judging like how serious of a biker you are by asking you this, right?
Well, most of the time I go to Crockett Park and on the trail system over there.
Okay. So trail.
I don't have to get on the highway.
Okay, what about road bikers? Do we have any road bikers in here?
I mean, these are paved trails over there.
Yes, how is it?
There's no cars, but it feels good.
Yeah.
Road
That's how it
bike
goes,
is
right?
very dangerous.
I wouldn't do it.
As a
Not
driver,
where I
that's
live.
very dangerous.
Yes, as a driver, it's dangerous. Wait, hold on.
We would,
I missed
he
the
would
first
be
part.
afraid of hitting someone.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Right.
Just because there's so many curves and corners.
Right.
Even our little road, Britton Lane, I don't appreciate it when people are biking on that road.
Well, I think a lot of
Because
times
it's
drive
hard
too
to
fast.
see.
what
Well, even
happens,
35.
what happens a lot of times if you have like a small bike culture, then you're not as used to seeing bikers. Like in Austin or something, it's like there are bikers everywhere. That's just a thing. And so it's not like, oh my gosh, a biker, what you're like looking at. It's like traffic calming, right? It's kind of like maybe you have deer out here that do the same function.
Well, it's a visibility issue. So there's so many turns
curve.
on narrow roads with no shoulders.
Yeah.
That you come around, I don't care if you're doing the speed limit or not, but if another car's coming the other way or one of these construction trucks or whatever, and there's a biker, it's not a good.
You stop.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why it was a really hard road to get the trails inside the neighborhoods to be multimodal, 8 to 10 feet. We had even board members at the time that said, these are wide enough for a car. But this is too wide, and developers didn't want to do the width and do the expense. So again, we brought the Greenway Trails Coordinator to speak before the entire planning commission to do a presentation, to help educate people that multimodal is the way to go with your bikes, with your walking, and that's the reason why Sunset Road was designed to be multimodal. So bicyclists and pedestrians, all the trails going into the high school, the state routes to school grants, you get federal money, it has to be multimodal. You have to show the sidewalks and the bike lane width. And from the old subdivision, like he was mentioning, we never had to get right of way because we had enough width. Where you have to obtain right of way, it's a little bit more challenging with that trail connectivity. Working on 2 projects in Williamson County where we're having to look at right of way acquisition for that connectivity. But I would like to ask one more thing if I could. I love the narrow road idea, except what we find is when roads remain so narrow and there's not enough parking within that planned development, as kids age out and they get their own cars, they graduate from high school, there's no way for them to park. You know, you have folks that you have cars spilling over. So in Brentwood, they've done a good job, I think, of some of their planned development overlays, thinking ahead for little parking areas where you have visitors. Because if you keep your street so narrow, which is great for traffic calming, you sometimes have unintended consequences. If someone's parked on the car, on the roadway, you can't get a fire truck through there, you got a problem. So Nolensville did experience that too, when they went from so wide, the rural country roads to so narrow. So that's maybe Goldilocks. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. No, it's something that we have to address all of the time around the country. And it's funny because you think that something like this, like roads are this many feet or that many feet, or fire trucks are this wide, and it's not like it doesn't really vary from place to place. Yet the thinking about it varies vastly, right? And so some places we go there, oh well, the roads, we need 20-foot lanes because our fire truck's 20 feet wide, and it's like, well, when you turn the sirens on, you just kind of straddle the line a little bit. Yeah, but our guys aren't very good at driving or whatever. Or they say, well, we got these outriggers, right? And so we got to address the outriggers. Okay, we probably do that. Other places we go, like, oh yeah, we've got our historic downtown, and yeah, we know when we're going through there, here's how we do it, and make sure that that guy's not driving that day or whatever. And so having to figure out, as every place we go around the country, people are wanting walkable, bikeable, pedestrian-friendly places. So having a whole palette of roads that accommodate today, cars and fire trucks that are big and have lots of equipment and outriggers and all those things, is something that is no problem, right? So I'll give you an example. Nearby West Haven. So in West Haven, probably some of the most narrow streets in Franklin, certainly any new development. And coincidentally, there's a fire station in the neighborhood, so that's good. And I think, because our office is actually in the neighborhood center there, and I don't know if we're just particularly accident prone or what, but I feel like there's a fire truck coming past our office every day, going through, and they make it through, right? They're able to go through the roads, and there's on-street parking. The lanes are about 10 feet wide in most places. Some places you actually, it's narrow enough that you have to, what's called a yield movement street. So there's on-street parking, and so you see somebody coming down the road, and you actually kind of get over an on-street space and let them come by, and then go there. And so, it all works. And one day I actually followed a fire truck through the neighborhood taking pictures because we have this conversation so often. And so the guest parking thing also comes up. So back to West Haven for a second. So in City of Franklin, when West Haven was being approved, the planning director said, you know what? You won't really park in their garage. They just put their stuff in their garage. It's like a storage unit, right? And you can't argue with that, right? A lot of people do, maybe the majority of people do. And so he said, okay, fine, no problem. The whole neighborhood is designed with on-street parking. So if you choose not to park in your garage, you can park on the street. And so he says, well, yeah, but where are guests going to park? And so my answer is I don't have that many friends, so I don't have that many guests. But so he says, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to require every house in West Haven to have a 22-foot parking pad behind it. So you don't park in your garage, you can park right there, and then you can leave on street for your guests. What happened was, the actual unintended consequence was that when you drive through West Haven, most times of the day and at night, unless you're on streets with some of the row houses, you find that the on-street parking spaces are empty. I guess people don't have friends like me, but the issue is the roads are designed to have that on-street parking. And the on-street parking provides a function for traffic calming, or creating a barrier between the pedestrian and the moving vehicles, et cetera. And so once you don't have it, now the person driving down that street has this sort of psychological subconscious thing going on, like, oh, this road is really wide. I can drive really fast. And so now you see people speeding. So there's a street called Pearl Street. One end of the street has detached single-family houses with 2- and 3-car garages. At a certain point, it changes to row houses. The row houses all have a 1-car garage, which means they have a 1-car parking pad, which means most houses have 2 cars, and one of them goes on the street and one goes in there. So a car coming down Pearl Street, you can sit on your porch and you can listen, and it goes past the single-family houses, and then and it slows down when it gets to the row houses because there's an on-street parked cars there. So except for around Christmas, when people have Christmas parties or Super Bowl Sunday or something like that, there's far more parking for guests than is needed. And even on those sort of day after Thanksgiving sale, using the parking lot analogy, moments, there's still enough parking for the guests to come in. So it's a valid concern, but proven out in reality and practice there, we're able to get the narrow streets, accommodate for guest parking, and all of those things. So I'm not worried about it, but it's definitely always something that we kind of work with Public Works and Fire to make sure we validate it.
All right, you brought up West Haven. Would you suggest that we use the West Haven pattern here, or we keep what we've got? I've driven West Haven, and the first thing I noticed was the wider streets. The second thing I noticed, the garages were pushed back to 20 feet past the front facade of the house. All our front entry, the maximum pushback by code is 3 feet. So just like you say, the garage is full of storage. There's 2 cars parked, and our setbacks, in my opinion, are not far enough. 2 cars are parked on the garage. One of them's blocking, if it's a truck, it's blocking the sidewalk. And then as families expand, they'll get 2 or 3 cars in the street. So what is the answer? Do we do like West Haven? Keep the streets wide enough for on-street parking? Because their streets with on-street parking are wider than our 26-foot streets.
Yeah, so
How do you solve that problem?
there's a house on Cheltenham Avenue in West Haven, and there's a truck that's parked across the sidewalk all the time. And it's the only one in the whole neighborhood. And what happened there was, for some reason, and I don't know why exactly, because I used to work for the developer, and that was not something that I did. The garage was moved up, as you said, kind of close to the street in that situation. It's on the side, so it's not in the front of the house. And the person never parks in the garage, and they always, when you have to walk around their truck, and it's, everybody's like, oh, you know, putting notes under the windshield wiper and stuff, you know. And so my recommendation is to not do what you said, first of all. Like, when you walk around, when you were in the presentation last time, I showed houses that say people live here versus houses that say cars live here. And so having that garage door on the front of the house like that, or even in front of the house, you don't see too many postcards taken of streets like that, right? It's not that postcard moment. It doesn't add to the image of the character and the quality of the town. So we also want to protect our small town character. And what you're really all talking about is kind of like the hamlet and historic stuff or whatever, and maybe the fact that there's not that many people here. But most people wouldn't, if I said go take pictures of your favorite things around here, probably wouldn't even take a picture of their own house, except for the memories they've made in the house. And so finding a way to design things differently, neighborhoods differently, put garages in a different location, following that model in West Haven. Now, the ones you're talking, the garages that are facing the street are few and far between. The only times when they have garages that are actually accessed from the street is when there's a stream or some sort of a topographic reason. They're trying to preserve the creek or whatever. Otherwise, the parking is accessed from the rear. So there's a rear lane that goes behind it. And so that's, but you see historic neighborhoods that don't have rear lanes or alleys, and they're accessed from the street, but the garage is behind the house. Go back, it could be attached too, but it's behind the main body of the house. So you never have somebody parking on the sidewalk unless they're trying to be a jerk. And then you don't have a sense even that cars are there because they're pushed back behind the house. And so those are the things that we focus on. But the streets in West Haven, the typical street section there, it's 8, 10, 10, 8. So 8 feet for parking, 2 10-foot driving lanes, and 8. So that gets you 26.
In our subdivision regs in the floods, we went to a 30-70, 30% front entry, 70% had to be rear or side entry.
For PUDs.
Our PUD when we had
Plan
it.
unit development.
What happened, we just got the 30% front entry, but we got very few true side or rear entries. What the builder did, he took the garage, it was on the back of the house, set it in the front of the house, and made it a side entry.
Sideways.
That way he kept his lot sizes a little bit narrow.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't have to make room for a driveway to the back. So you still get the appearance of the garage on the front.
Right.
You just see it from the side.
The
You don't
doors
see
aren't
it.
as obvious.
Yeah.
Except for if you're heading down this.
That's right. When you head down the street, there they are.
So what they've done are put in courtyard entry garages. So it's a front access, but you have courtyard. What Franklin tried to do many years ago was completely disallow front-facing garages, and they were sued. They were not allowed to completely disallow it, but they can discourage front-facing garages. And the way that they did that was by saying the front-facing garage has to be set back from the front door a certain number of feet. I don't know if it's 8 feet, 10 feet, whatever that is. And they set it up in a way that it more so encourages either alley access or rear-facing garages. But if you do have to put a front-facing garage on, it is recessed behind the front door 8 to 10 feet. So that would be a way to get in front of disallowing courtyard entry garages as well.
Yeah.
That you can no longer have that. Something that I've noticed in West Haven is just because you keep bringing it up, they have streets that are boulevards, streets that are streets, streets that are avenues. And you said we have a 26-foot width. It's kind of a one-size-fits-all. In West Haven, if that is kind of your idea of greatness, then the boulevards are a certain width. every street that ends in boulevard is a certain width. Every street that ends in avenue is the smallest street within the neighborhood. And every street that ends in street is an intermediary street. And so if you are trying to get a mix of that sort, you can't have a one size fits all. You have to have 3 different sizes. Something that you kind of brought up just touched on, but didn't necessarily bring up. Does Nolensville have a mission statement per se?
Yeah, and in the comp plan, there's a vision statement.
And the reason I asked, so again, you keep bringing up Franklin as something to look towards. And Franklin decided a long time ago, they want to be the #1 small town in America. And that's great. They've done some huge things. Franklin has public housing, they have trailer parks, they have factories and rock quarries. They have a great big mix of things, some of which are cute and some of which aren't cute. And I think everybody lives in Nolensville for a reason. They don't want to live in Franklin. Brentwood decided a long time ago, their mission statement was to be an exclusionarily zoned suburb of Nashville, period. And so what is Nolensville's mission statement? And to me, Nolensville has always had an allure that it has a rural charm that the other surrounding communities don't have. And I think that it's extremely important in my eyes to maintain the rural charm in whatever way we can. I don't necessarily want to be an exclusionarily zoned suburb of Nashville. I don't necessarily want to be the #1 small town in America. I want to preserve what Nolensville has, which is the rural charm that is increasingly eaten away. And so if there's a way to proceed forward by maintaining the rural charm, that would kind of be the mission statement in my mind.
I'm gonna vote for him.
Yeah.
Can I say one thing on that? We had a big thing in Triune. I don't know if y'all know about the Triune special area. They're experiencing growth because of alternate wastewater treatment systems. Sewer is no longer directing growth. So rural property owners who felt protected from high density growth are no longer protected. With the Schaefer step systems, we saw in the county neighborhoods hopscotching all over within the base zoning. So some of you know, we went through an extensive comprehensive plan with public meetings and so forth, and we did reduce the density to 1 unit per 5 acres. You can still cluster and have a neighborhood with larger percentage open space, but you're not going to get the high enough density that we as a county could not sustain with our infrastructure, with our schools. So kind of tying into what Nolensville is doing, you know, I had to face a whole room of about 50 rural folks that hate subdivisions. And I live in one. I live in a half-acre lot subdivision. And I explained to them that rural to you is one house carved up like this. And there's validity to that. But when you look at animal life, ecosystems, and nature, when you do cluster to an extent and preserve larger spaces of space, is that rural? I think we have to define, like, what is rural? You know, it would be great to have an agri-hood in Nolensville. Wouldn't that be great? There's one in me in Georgia. It's beautiful. But when we use these terms like rural, suburban, urban, they all mean something different to everybody else. And so I'm trying to help unincorporated areas understand with clustering, you can look at minimum lot sizes and all that jazz that we did in Nolensville. But think about protecting hillsides, nature, in addition to the growth, which is a smart growth component. And the last piece of background I would say, when people just like you years ago were like, what do we gonna look like? They drove around, and Cottonwood is one of the oldest neighborhoods in Franklin, and it holds up. You know why? They have open space and protection. They have entirely front facades and private property too, at minimum 14,000 square feet. So that's just another concept of, you know, something holding up over years where, you know, we don't see just garage. And so that's why Nolensville went to a minimum 11,000 square foot lot at one point, the loud side load. And then years later, it went to an average 14,000. And all this history is just good to know, but I just love continuing this conversation because as a town grows, sometimes what you want changes. But you kind of have to understand, like, you're not creating a wheel that already has been kind of created. You know what I mean? Like, understand the history, and then decide for you all, what do you want going forward?
Right. And that's what I talked about last night, why the role of the public is so important in our process, is understanding what that Nolensville character is. Because what I would say to you is that in the comp plan, as I read some of the goals last night, I think maybe the first one says protect and preserve the small town charm and character or whatever. And so let's just pick that one as maybe the fundamental, most important thing. And my question to all of you to ponder as you head out the doors after this meeting is, what about the new development that you see here says Nolensville? What is the small town charm in any development that's come after the 1920s, 30s, right? What development do you have here that isn't in another neighborhood, another city nearby? And so the difference that I see right now, at least for the direction that we're heading, is a difference of degree. We are now here where other places were 10 years ago or so, just because of their growth patterns and pressure. And so we see all of these different places where you go, I don't want to be this place, or I don't want to be that place. But they were you before. And so some of the places that are around are really like a cautionary tale for you to think about. And the idea of not just for the roads not being one size fits all. Because like when we were coordinating with the transportation consultant on this, like we were creating street sections, like what the different street, and we have them probably 20 or so different street sections to incorporate and to look at. From the rural country roads to whatever the most urban version of a road, and I use that term in air quotes loosely. I think urban around here, right? But I calibrated those roads based on where it seemed like what we were starting to hear, but we'll further calibrate those based on conversations with the community. But I think that there needs to be something for everyone. There needs to be a place where if you want a half-acre lot, you got it. If there's somebody who wants to continue farming, they can farm. If there's somebody who wants 5 acres, so be it. But if there's somebody who interested in something different than that, right, and not just some sort of patio home, like the only density that you have is some sort of conventional patio homes, scattered around. Somebody wants to be a part of a village, a center, a heart of the community, then there's that too. And that's the magic to figuring out how to make a place where you want to stay. Maybe I was talking to somebody about, hey, what do you think about your kids? Like, think they're going to want to stick around here? And they said, I don't care if they do or not. Head on out. I've made this place for me. And so then you say, okay, like I talked about last night. Well, what about you in 20 years? What about when you don't want the pasture or the half acre to mow or the whatever, or you can't afford to have somebody cut it for you? Where do you want to go then? You don't want to have to leave town. And so I'm trying to make a place for everybody and making sure that the growth that you're getting happens in a organic way that is meaningful to you. But many people don't realize this about West Haven. The property for West Haven is 1,500 acres. 50% of that is in conservation, to your point. All those hillsides, all of that will never be developed. The trails, the streams, the lakes, the farm ponds over there, all of that stuff is in conservation. So it seems a bit dense for a lot of people. Most people like it, but some people think it's too dense. But if you take it in gross and look at the entirety of the property, it's actually not that dense. So
Maybe the people around the table respond to what he was, so he brought up some good point.
Yeah.
I'm just interested to see what the other folks are doing.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you mentioned exclusionary zoning, and I would say we have an exclusionary zoning, it's pretty much all you can build is single family homes in town. That's all you see typically. We do have a trailer park, nothing against them at all. I think it's nice to have those opportunities, the different opportunities. I know we're all mostly families that move here. That's why I moved here. The other reason I moved here was because I couldn't afford Brentwood or Franklin. You know, this was the cheaper option at the time. And I would say now, I could not even afford to live in Nolensville. Home values have skyrocketed just in the last 2 or 3 years. I wouldn't be able to purchase right now if I was looking to live here today. So, you know, if you look at, do you keep building 3,000 square foot homes at almost $1 million a pop? Or do you offer an alternative, maybe 1,000 square feet, maybe 1,500 square feet? How do we start incorporating these alternative housing opportunities? I think it's something we need to consider.
I was gonna ask you, because you do have alternative housing opportunities, like in village zoning, you have those condominiums there, so forth. You have 55 plus in the planning and development that were added. You have the, single residential, the townhouses in the 55 plus. In Nolensville, you have a combination of individual lots and 55 plus. And so I would just say that, it's not that there are some, this is some variety. I think some people are only saying it that way, but it's like, what variety do you want? And maybe what we don't have or haven't considered. I understand that. And the best blessing is traditions that happen on Nashville-Davidson County side. We have begged retirement folks to come to Nolensville for years. Please stop. No, we have people aging out that have to go farther away. And now we have a great location on the Davidson County side, but within our community. So, but good to think about the long term.
Well, and to that end too, I mean, this idea of lifelong communities, right? And so right now, what you see in neighborhoods that have a wide variety of housing options within the same neighborhood, rather than being a pod of this, and next neighborhood, a pod of that, is that people actually move through their life cycle in the same neighborhood, and they're part of that community and all. And so that's very, very rare, except for historic areas. So.
I just wanted to say that in raising 2 kids in Nolensville, I can say something about the small town charm. It's about having our school teachers, our police officers, our firefighters living among us. That's what made this community so great growing up. My kids had the best leaders, Book Scout leaders, just wonderful, wonderful people. And I don't want to lose that. I want our teachers to stay. I want our police officers and our firefighters, because they don't make enough money to afford all that. So what is that solution? I don't know.
No, it's a supply and demand issue, really. When you boil it down, it's like, if it's a desirable place, prices are going up, and there's a limited number of houses available, the prices keep going up. And so one of the benefits of growing is that sometimes you're growing to accommodate for those people here that are currently here. You want them to stay here, so they're not priced out, but also the idea of being able to have the multitude of price points that you're talking about. And so a lot of times, people say, well, we do have 55 plus, or we have this or that. Well, what if you're 54? Or what we see is in these newer mixed neighborhoods, a la West Haven, you see there's a high predominance of young families and a high predominance of seniors. And the seniors say, I don't want to go live over there in the center for seniors and all the other people who are aging around me, and we're all kind of dying together. Like, I want to be around the kids and the activity and the vitality. And so a lot of the sort of age restricted stuff has really sort of, in some ways, fallen out of favor. I mean, there are always some people who are like, yeah, I don't want to hear those brats screaming in the back, or out front or whatever. And so for sure, there will be always be a place for it. But that is a new invention also. There was no such thing, right? Used to, mom or Aunt Sally or Uncle Sal came and lived, in the back room or over the garage or whatever, and sort of multi-generational things happened in the family. Now, we got a taste of that again for everybody who forgot that when the recession happened, right? And so lots of, kids came home from college back to home with the parents, and sometimes older parents moved in with. And so you see that, and so what we're seeing a lot too is new buildings being designed to accommodate multi-generational living, even in the same structure or an ancillary structure on the same property. And those secondary things like the apartment above the garage are great places where you're a school teacher, you just got out of school, you know, like we have one over our garage, and we've had the girl live there for years now. It's great, you know, she sits, she sits around, she does this and that, all kinds of stuff, and she has like sort of an extended part of our family, and has that security, not having to live on her own, not to nowhere, whatever. And it's affordable, and she has all the benefits of kind of being in this neighborhood. She can walk to things like groceries.
But then she wants to raise a family too.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
you want her kids in the neighborhood too.
Absolutely. For sure.
But I think you touched on one thing there. There's one thing about living, i.e. where you sleep. It's another thing about living and what the community has to offer outside of where you lay your head.
Yeah.
And I think that's some of the things that we've got to consider as we move forward, because high school, right? You all don't come to Nolensville to hang out, right? There's nothing here.
Yeah.
There's nothing here. I mean, what, hang out at Sonic? I mean,
They like that.
Right, so I think we have to be cognizant as we build and grow and try to figure this out. It's not just about where you lay your head, it's about what do we then do outside of that as a community.
And it's hard, you don't have a center, physical center, or hard, like, you know, you may go and hang out at the Amish mill or whatever for a moment, but you get too many people, next thing you know, you're in the street, you know?
Which is why I love what we talked about last night about the greenway.
Yeah.
You know, and having not only that green space in the creek, but then also what do we do around it?
Right.
So whether it's, I've seen it in other communities, whether it's a trail system, that then off that trail system, there's ice cream shops, restaurants, name it on down the road. And it's all, list goes on. Well, we could do that around the creek.
Yeah, that's
Build that, but all we're doing now, someone may ask the question, someone made a comment that ran last night, it's like, Nolensville Road's ugly. It's just ugly. There's no charm to it at all, and the decisions that continue to be made aren't doing anything to change that. So how do we change that? How do we make it walkable? How do we make it so that people can park in one location, go here, here, here without going, oh shoot, I parked here, now I've got to get in my car and drive across the street. Because if I try to walk across it, I'm dead. It just doesn't work.
We tried to walk across the Martins one day.
No.
We made it.
You tried to hurt left, that's a block.
Took a minute.
No, I mean, coming out of the meeting last night,
No,
we
turn
sat
left.
and waited forever because the person in front of me was from the wall. Okay. Well,
Even small things like you're doing new development, right? I've seen two buildings under construction right next to Martin's. Martin's is new as well. Everybody says our favorite part of town is the old village or whatever. So why don't you do more of that? Why is Martin set back behind the parking lot and buildings next to it set back behind the big parking lot? If the parking lot had just been behind it and then it felt like what you love.
Makes
you
no
know?
sense.
Simple.
Makes no sense.
Well, that over there is much closer to the creek on the backside of it, so that may be part of it.
Well, maybe it's better to have the parking closer to the creek than the building.
Right there.
All of
yeah.
that plays,
Doesn't matter if it floods the parking lot.
and all of that has to do with topography too. For my time, all the parking was close to the front. Like everything that everyone's talking about. And then you had people come in where they didn't have, all the parking's down the slope, and people could have to hike up to the commercial. So you've got to look at the whole picture of floodplain, topography. It's not just one thing, it's not either or, it's both and. So that's what I love about planners and good speakers, is that you think about the whole picture. Yeah. But I will say this as a county commissioner, this is all I will say. I'm here as a resident, but the county commissioner had to tell you that over 70% of our budget is Williamson County Schools. 30 million, 40 million, 60 million for a high school. One reason why we had to slow growth in our unincorporated areas. So I will tell you, I'm one of 24, and they all watch municipalities and their growth patterns. And if there is some growth, it puts such a financial burden on the county as a whole, it can unintentionally impact other partnering opportunities for a bigger library and for more parks. So I just hope that this municipality, Victor does a great job of this, continues to work in concert with the county, in concert with the state. Because any decision you make isn't just your little territory. It's going to have long-lasting consequences at all levels of government. So I appreciate that.
So the more kids, the better then.
No. The more kids, the more schools we have to build on county money. Just so y'all know, that's our number one driver, Williamson County. It's schools. So if you do high density in areas where you don't have the infrastructure to get the buses there, if you do high density in areas where we can't get kids safely back and forth to school with moms going here and there, the trails are great. We've worked hard on that. But you have limited infrastructure for intensive growth, and then where we put the schools means we are going to displace students farther and farther out from their neighborhoods and where they enjoy. This is just a reality of growth. And some of us in the past, we have advocated for our rural areas, for them to stay in school zones because they didn't have subdivisions and neighborhoods to interact with. If you displace people, that affects their quality of life just as much as anything else. So that's just another tool we have to look at as you guys are looking at where to put density and how to do it.
So to clarify those, we were talking about what the character and using these precise words. So how do you define high density?
Well, high density, if you look at the base density of Nolensville was suburban residential was 1.8. Obviously you have in Brentwood 1.1 was their base density. You have to look at base densities and then look, if we do an overlay, if we do a density bonus, what are we getting in exchange for that density bonus?
I mean, like, is
beyond
West
your
Haven-
base
is West
density.
Haven high density, or are you talking about like urban downtown Nashville, or what is that?
Well, when you talk about high density, okay, so look at north of us in Nashville, Davidson County. That is considered very high density. And Burkett Commons and all of that, that's high density. And the thing is that the people are not moving there to go, I'm going to go into Williamson County schools. They love the area. They're part of our larger community. But if you build that level of high density, Lenox Village type, Burkett, whatever, in Nolensville within 11 square miles, it's not if, there will be some ramifications for schools. So it's just another thing to think about.
So in Burkett, the most, I haven't been there yet, I've just seen pictures. It looks like the most dense housing type there is a townhouse or the apartment.
What you see from Knowles Road is only a small part of it.
Right, it goes
You
back
need
from
to
there,
have
but it's a lot of single family houses.
Well,
too.
but on past that is much more, right across the road from that. Within a half mile of what you see on Knowles Road, apartments,
Okay.
big time.
Well, Nashville, Davidson County is coming right up to the border. Nolensville, y'all only control what's in your little 11 square miles.
Well,
If Murder's
you're
gonna come
making
this
the point
way-
that I made last night, which was, we are not the size of a Franklin or a Brentwood, or maybe that we are tiny. And there are just certain things that we will not be able to do because of that very reason, from an infrastructure standpoint. So,
What is the long-term plan for Nolensville Road and the timeline?
No idea.
That's what I thought.
Well, there's a couple of things that I'd like to add to what Beth is saying. One is that moving forward, we have been having developers work with the Williamson County school system and let them know what's coming ahead of time. We're also asking for donation of land for schools so that that is thought about ahead of time and not as an afterthought. So I don't want anybody walking away thinking, oh my goodness, there's not been any discussion about that. That happens every time somebody is coming forth with something. We're talking about what is the impact to schools. We had one in our workshop last week, and I gave them the names of the folks at Williamson County Schools they need to go back and talk to get actual numbers, because the numbers that they provided to us, we didn't feel were accurate. And so I said, I want those numbers coming from WCS, not from some algorithm, that you think is appropriate. So we're partnering with the county, and to your point, Victor is very helpful in that regard. We do have capacity at some of the schools currently at Nolensville Elementary and at Sunset and at Jordan. So it's not as if there's not a little bit of space there. And Nolensville High School was also designed to be built out further as growth continues to happen. So we just have to make sure we're getting good information to the county and making decisions in concert with what's happening there. And that's happening. So I don't want anybody thinking that conversation is not going on.
And I would agree with that, because I gave the number for Williamson County Schools with Victor when I became a county commissioner, and, with the change of government, like, let's be on the front end. And like, I'm meeting with the planning director this afternoon. I'm gonna be updated on all of the neighborhoods that want to connect in the unincorporated area, because that's who I'm hearing from. They're all saying, oh, this neighborhood's gonna connect through us. So that relationship has been built over time. It's very positive, and it needs to continue. And that was my point. And so, nothing happens in a vacuum. Everything touches something else. And even our trail system, Ross would know this. We don't have a trail system without Williamson County giving us the entire right of way for our small town connections project, except a very small part. So I just want to continue that intergovernmental mindset as you guys are thinking, this is what we want. How do we partner with other levels of government? So.
To answer the question about Nolensville Road, so Victor and Mayor Adams are attending the GNRC meetings. That is the Greater
Nashville Regional Council.
Thank you. I can never remember what the acronym stands for, but my understanding is that the state is willing and ready to help us with what we need to do with Nolensville Road. We are in the process of figuring this out with the major thoroughfare plan and with TPUDC before we put money on the table. We want to make sure it's the right decision of what needs to happen with Nolensville Road. So that's coming. And as soon as, we're ready to move, they're ready to jump in with us. It's going to be 5 to 10 years for sure. But the fact of the matter is, we were not prior sitting at that table on a regular basis. And so we're at a point where we've got to be there every meeting, and that's happening. So I think you're going to start to see some progress there. I don't have dates. I don't know, Victor, if from the latest meeting, if you have anything that, would be more up to date, but.
No, the only thing I'll add is that when the the Transportation Planning Board came out with the 30-year plan for the region around Nashville, our section of Nolensville Road was not in it to be funded. And that's because Nolensville had never been sitting at the table to ensure that it was part of the plan. That's happening now. And so we're very encouraged that it won't take 30 years.
What I see a lot is the majority or a good portion of the traffic coming through Nolensville Road lives in other counties.
Right.
We're just a pathway to Brentwood, Franklin, everywhere else. If we didn't have that, our road would probably be okay.
You're right.
But we need some way to get those people going around Nolensville. Because Nolensville Road right through here in the historic district can't sustain that much backed up traffic all the time. So we need, bypass, get that in the works.
And that's why the major thoroughfare plan is such an important piece for the town for the community to really participate in and make sure that we make the right decisions on it, because it will address those issues. And once we get that adopted, then the town council, the elected officials will have to get behind it and help to fund those improvements so that we can make some headway.
Yeah, we're always 5 years behind.
Well, and to give some history, just so everybody knows, when Bend Creek was approved, simultaneously, the alternate B route was looked at by the state before I was ever involved. And sadly, it goes through Bedford. And so when you become a mayor and you find out a major bypass is gonna take out 11 homes, that's not a good day. So we asked the original design engineer to do some looking at that and reroute it for 6 homes. That's still too much, right? And so the bypass was the state plan that they always had. We were on the moderate, I forget the term, Victory. We were on the midterm plan at one point. And we would do silly things like have the legislators at the library for quiche and keep talking about the bypass. But you're right, until you're a 5,000 population, you don't have representation at that body. So we would interact with the mayor of Brentwood, the county mayor, and say, will you represent us here on this issue? After your 5,000 population, you need to be at that table with that constant representation, which I applaud the town of Nolensville's doing that. But that has fallen, it has been on a plan, it's been off a plan. The one thing that I will compliment the prior administration for doing, they did keep that on their eye, I believe, Victor, like they allowed, like when Nolan Mill came in, they required a reservation of land potentially for the bypass, not a dedication, because you can't take, but a reservation. So it wasn't like that nobody was looking at this bypass thing, but with the bigger presence at the GNRC, I think the town's going the right direction.
To further elaborate on the earlier comment about not having a one-size-fits-all for roads, as you all are looking at and participating in the conversation about Nolensville Road and what to do about it, because it's such a thorn in your side right now, there will be a tendency to do too much to it and not be careful because you're just trying to solve this traffic problem. The idea of no one size fits all for roads actually works the same on one road. So you'll have different character along a road. And so when you come through your historic village, it should not be the same street design as when you come to your historic village center. Fine, if you want to be speedy or whatever, we've all been through these annoying little towns that the road, you're on the way to the beach or something, you gotta slow down and go through their stupid downtown. Well, you know what? It's awesome. That downtown is great and people who live there love it. And so in the process of solving your traffic problem, as you point out, it's mostly people from elsewhere because y'all don't have that many people here. You don't want to ruin this jewel. You have to fight to the death to save that. And when they say, well, what do you want the road to look like? They show them pictures of Leaper Sport, whatever. Find your perfect example of this little rural hamlet. And it's not very long and it's going to cause some slowdown, but it's going to be like a half a second. So, they're, oh, let's do slow down, solve problems. Yeah, for a minute. But what you want for businesses is the idea of slow flow. Traffic. It's better for businesses if traffic's not moving, flying past there because they're, oh, yeah, I need to go get something from the feed seed or whatever, so it's like fight to the death.
There's two things that you're saying that I love what you're saying right there. There's two things that I'm hoping this process will help us with is one, being able to really articulate the steps and the vision in our zoning plan will help people be patient and maybe not do too much too soon. But two, I'm looking for, as a town, I think we got hostage by Nolensville Road for a while just because everybody's like, well, we have to fix Nolensville Road. It's not happening today. So I'm looking for that phasing of solutions that aren't necessarily related to Nolensville Road, or ways we can make Nolensville Road not something we're just waiting on, but a critical part of everyday planning. I'm looking for the 5-year, not just the 20-year and the 30-year. I'm looking for the 5-year, because 5 years in the Nolensville lifespan is a lot. And so I'm hoping that's what we're going to get out of this process and talking.
A question for you. As you've studied our current zoning, what do you find wrong with it? I mean, the way we laid it out with our different zones.
Isn't that Monday's presentation?
Oh, you got
Yeah.
out that one.
How long is this session?
You ran them off with that.
Thank you, Brian,
Yeah,
so much.
thanks for
Thank
coming.
you.
Well, I wasn't able to make my,
No.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Yeah, we're over. So
Okay.
anybody who has somewhere else to be, sorry about that. But
Well,
this is an important conversation.
Could you re-answer that?
Yeah, so it's a long list. I don't know, you're gonna take a few of the greatest hits, you have a few on the top of your head.
You rely a lot on site plan review as opposed to having straight on standards for development. You,
Between the subjective process rather than objective.
looks like you've got a PUD process that may be subverting a little bit of the whole thing you're trying to do because PDs are always negotiated as opposed to standards. You'll hear me over and over about the things that aren't standards because they rely on the planning commission, whoever's on it, and
which changes, by the way.
and the legislative body, who's ever on it, to kind of torturously go through every project. And it's whatever that group is made up of that day is what gets approved or not. That's not really a way to have a predictable outcome. Those are the biggest things I've seen so far. I mean, the organization of it is a little bit all over the place, the code, and it needs to be straightened up a good bit.
One of the things that may not be aware of this, but I've learned recently in talking to developers around the region about Nolensville, is that they say, yeah, I used to do stuff in Nolensville, but I quit. And I said, why? It's early on, they're at a fork in the road, there are big things that are gonna be happening, people are excited about some things, and they said the process was just too much. I was just getting beat over the head, all the time. And so then I'm looking around for the results and the example of what does this pound of flesh look like in the built form? And back to my earlier point, what development here is uniquely Nolensville and not seen anywhere else that warranted the developer feeling like they got their teeth kicked in and not want to come back here again. Now, some developers, that's a good thing, because you don't want them working here. The ones I'm calling don't fall into that category. And so that's something, I don't know if y'all know that you don't have that reputation. It's a good way to slow growth, by the way, if you don't want growth.
They didn't know how to put it.
Right.
And you're missing another thing, and that is, without those standards, public trust is eroded. And, you talk about why was there an administration change? That's exactly why. Because it didn't seem like one developer would get preferential treatment while another would not. Or, this one got exceptions, this one did not. You look at our neighborhood, simple thing, right? One developer was able to cut down curbs so there's not a mountain to get into your driveway off the street. When I try to go do that, oh no, you can't do that. What do you mean this developer did? Well, you're gonna get a $10,000 fine. Developer didn't get fined. And the other developers in the neighborhood, well, they couldn't cut them down. So it leads to the perception of cronyism.
Let me respond to that. When we started with our curb and gutter section, people, the builders, were cutting the curb. Somewhere through that process, a developer come along, well, that's a mountable curb. It is a mountable curb. It's not a barrier curb. So you can drive on it. So I'm gonna cut that cost. Now, we had a design standard for that cutting the curb, but we did not have it in an ordinance. The lady sat behind you helped me. And I fought for that for 2 years because I was the one that wanted the mountable curb to start with when we were doing our subdivision regs. And it took me 2 years to get it in the ordinance. But a lot of these subdivisions had already been approved. And once a flood plan or any plan is approved, you cannot change it. So the continuing phases got to do their curbs without cutting them. Today, if you will look, everything has been put in as the curb cut. I've ridden around and stopped a few driveways and told the superintendent on the job that was wrong. Now, I'm just a citizen now. As a planning commissioner, remember I couldn't do it anyway. But I got them to talk to the town engineer and they cut them, and they're doing it today. But Lisa got up in public comment, and that's one of your commissioners, and said something. And I tracked her down after the meeting and said, lady, I need your help. You call me. You know, asked me, I said, you call all your neighbors that don't like that home in every subdivision and help me. And within 3 months, we got that put in there. But we could not make the later phases change because their plan had been approved. Beth will tell you, that we tried to change our road standard and make a little thicker road after a subdivision was started. We tried to enforce it. That developer took the town to court and won. So we could not impose design standards or building standards like that after that. So the new phase come in. So it's in there now. It's in there.
You get a
can-
homeowner
Yeah,
to
you
go
get
and cut their
retroactive.
curb
An
now.
homeowner could go cut their curb and there's no bill.
Yes, that's
That's
right.
These
a
are-
bird.
I don't know where you got the 10,000. That was either a real estate salesman or the builder telling you that, but that has never been,
No, that was neither. That was actually our neighbor.
well, okay, your neighbor was misinformed.
So
Because it's never been in our code, you could not cut the curb. Our first building standards had that. In our, I think it's, number 24, number 12.
And
one of
again,
the-
this is just one example, right? The curve was simply one example, but it's just inconsistency.
There was some inconsistency. I agree with
And it was not a timing issue on the curve thing for our neighborhood. Just FYI.
Consistency is critical in any government body. and
Agreed,
jurisdiction. And I
agreed.
think
And,
that's why
and as I
Victor-
said, it was the appearance.
Yeah.
But this type of
Because of that.
civil discourse is what we need, and that's something that I don't recall. Maybe it happened before I started getting involved, but 3 minutes of one person at a time is just, it's almost like social media. It's a blurb of information without context. And you can't tell those stories. You can't understand things. And civil discourse brings us together and feedback, so this kind of thing is what we need.
And really, and so you guys tell specific anecdotes, and, they're anecdotes too. But anecdotes, and you, regardless of the facts of the situation, the point is, I hear voting for objective standards on all around the table. Everybody says to be objective and be consistent and fair, and that's what we do, right? So we see, so many zoning ordinances that'll, like, some planner will try to come in and do a zoning ordinance, and they're like, yeah, there's this thing, and the town wants to do it, but they can't really make people, so let's put it in there as like a, you kind of hopefully sort of will maybe put this thing in and that, and that's like, that's not, zoning is law, right? And so you have to be written in very specific and direct language. This is this, and you shall, and you must, and you will. And so we are very, he's a land use attorney. So he's like, we might try to put in wishy-washy stuff, and he's like, we don't let. That's right. That's right. We have adult supervision.
I always ask whenever we were going to put something in, to put the word shall, or you will, not you can.
Right.
I always wanted black and white, didn't always get that, but
yeah.
Really?
Y'all got
You
a
know-
lot, I was gonna say a lot of your site plan, you got site plan things that are appendices, you got character appendices, you got a bunch of appendices, nearly without exception, they say should and all that. Right?
Yeah.
So we're gonna get that sorted out for y'all.
that's good.
All right, so we're way over. I know I probably have to, oh, yeah, I see.